So welcome, America, to the On the Blue Line podcast. I am your host, Wayne Mulder, and I welcome each of you back to the show. 2021 is going to be a great year. You all had friends and loved ones that said that, right? That put that out on social media. Well, I have some bad news for you. We are only 2 weeks in to what seems like a lifetime of 2021. You know what? We're going to start right there after this. So welcome back. It's been a little while since we have recorded anything and put out a show for you. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to sit down and get some more videos, more podcasts out for you for On the Blue Line. As many of you know, this is not the only thing that I do. In fact, my primary job is exactly what I promote on here, which, of course, I'd like to keep my primary job. So in 2020, as the world was falling apart, and as we weren't 100% sure what was going to happen with the election and with COVID and all the uncertainty, I took a break again. And I know, you're thinking that is no way to build a podcast. And you would be absolutely correct. That is not the best way to build a podcast. However, it's honest, and it is something that I feel from time to time that I have to do. I have to step back from the microphone, and I'm hoping that there'll be less and less of that in the days ahead. But it is important that when I come to you, when I talk to you, when I share stories with you, that I'm speaking truth and that I'm speaking from a place of where we have looked at the totality of what's going on and that we are telling it in the right way. And that's very important in general. You're going to hear today in some of the stories that I'm going to bring to you of officers who have done things that is going to cost them their job. And they may or may not have done some of it for the right reasons, some of it for the wrong reasons. But at the end of the day, we're law enforcement and we're held to a higher calling. We're held to a higher requirement of what we have to do. And because of that higher standard, you have to behave in a certain way, and that's understood, right? So let's look back at 2020 a little bit. You know, it was a tough year for many. If you live in certain states, you may have had your businesses shut down. I know it's not just law enforcement that listens to this podcast. And you may be somewhere where the lockdowns are forcing you to work from the house. That could be good. That could be bad. Maybe you have a job that you can't do from the house and you're not a so-called essential employee. And if you're not a so-called essential employee, which, by the way, I consider all employees essential, but that's neither here nor there. If you are not deemed by the government an essential employee, 2020 has probably been a tough year for you. You know, and we went through a very divisive election season, and there's definitely some things on the horizon that I think are only going to be more divisive, right? I mean, that's kind of the nature of the world in which we live and the world, and as I've said over and over again, the world that we have chosen. You know, I think when we look back at 2020, the hardest thing for me was coming to you guys week after week and trying to say, hey, hang in there. Things are going to get better. While knowing simultaneously that better is probably not the operative term. In fact, I would argue that things are going to get worse is probably more factual and maybe even a little bit more of where we were at. However, since then, I've been spending more and more time thinking on this concept and what we can do as law enforcement. See, 2020 was a tough year. And like I said when I opened the show, there was a lot of people that thought the calendar changing was somehow going to change all the issues that they're facing or all the things that they're seeing as a nation. I think when we stop to reason that out, we all are a little bit smarter than that. We all realize that that's not the way it really works. You don't get to look at the calendar and say, hey, on December 31st, everything is magically going to get better, though I did nothing to help make it better, right? And so that's where we're at. We had all sorts of friends and family that would put that out, maybe even we ourselves. And sometimes it's in humor. I'm not saying that it is nefarious or that it is even necessarily negative or that it's even a bad thing. Like sometimes that's exactly what we need to do is have a little humor out there, you know, and show that the year may bring good luck, if you would. However, I think at the end of the day, we have to realize the choice that we have. And by the end of this podcast, I hope that I draw that point home to you. So, 2020 was a tough year. Yes, this podcast did not come out on a regular basis in 2020. However, I'm going to do my best to get it out to you on a regular basis in 2021, including not only this show, which is Morning Roll Call, which we've got some cool things in the works, or at least what I think are cool things in the work for what it's going to bring, but also the interview room, which comes out on a very regular basis as well. 2020 was a big year for me also. So in a future podcast, I'm going to talk about some of the things that I did to make myself a better person, things I did as far as weight loss, things that I did as far as trying to better myself first, that whole put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you help those around you, in order to be ready to come back in the right state of mind and to talk to you week after week and to start dissecting some of the things that we can do. So, thank you for listening. Thank you for coming back. And I'm looking forward to another great year, no matter what happens in the world around us. All right, so let me take just a quick minute. Week after week, I ask my guest, coffee or tea? And 9 out of 10 times, I think, the majority have always said coffee. And you know why? Because cops typically like coffee. So whether you're in law enforcement or you're a law enforcement supporter, I think you're going to probably, statistically, like coffee. And if you do, I want you to consider my friends over at Campfire Blend. They have been with us now for probably a year helping support this podcast. So please check out my friends. It's campfireblend.com, and you're going to save 10% with the code BLUELINE, all one word, BLUELINE, at checkout. Campfireblend.com, code BLUELINE for 10% off. All right, so welcome back. This is police news that matters to you. Here's something you probably didn't know. The Capitol was attacked by agitators and rioters. Okay, maybe you did know that. And maybe that's my original point with this entire thing, is that 2021 has not been off to a great start. In fact, I hate to break it to you, we are only 2 weeks in. Yeah, I know. It's a little bit hard to believe. But with being only 2 weeks in, a lot has happened. The Senate has decided that we want one style of government, one ruling class. So that's going to make 2021 very interesting and bring home some of the points that I'm going to make during this podcast. But it's going to be a very interesting year. But I want to specifically bring to you a couple news stories and a couple thoughts on those news stories in this section of police news that matters to you. One thing that oftentimes I think gets neglected or gets lost in traditional news stories, whether we're talking the Antifa riots of the summer or we're talking the QAnon riots that happened at the Capitol or any of the many agitators and rioters that have been out there throughout the year on both sides of the aisle and everywhere in between, a lot of them just wanting chaos, is that when we talk about anarchy and we talk about chaos and we talk about civility, which is what we want law and we want order. So it's important that we understand that it is our role to be that line between civility and anarchy. So first and foremost, you can't take place or take a part in the anarchy and expect that to be okay. And that is exactly what happened. So there's a news story dated January 15th where a Houston officer resigns after being linked to the Capitol attack. The chief stated that a longtime Houston Police Department officer by the name of Tam Pham, he had dropped off his resignation with Chief Art Acevedo ahead of a disciplinary meeting on Friday with the top lawman. It goes on to state that the officer, Mr. Pham, had put out images on social media of him being at the Capitol, but not only that he was at the Capitol, he decided to enter the Capitol building. Now, I want to take a minute and whenever we talk about these, and I've seen this a lot on the conventional news, there were two things going on. And as Ben Shapiro often says, and he's absolutely correct, two things can be true at the same time. So first, you have the insurrection that took place at the Capitol. That was wrong. Everybody has uniformly said that it was wrong, and anyone who went in there needs to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Simultaneously, or what we've come to find out simultaneously, in fact, that insurrection, it appears from a couple news sources now, actually had started either at the beginning or middle of a speech that was given by President Trump in reference to the election issues that he saw. Now, again, no matter where you stand on that, whether you believe there were some discrepancies with the election or you believe there were not, that's up to you. But that group of people that were there listening to the president and to the other speakers were not involved in any kind of insurrection. They were there to do exactly what the First Amendment allows for, which is to redress or address the federal government for concerns in reference to something that was taking place. So there is a dichotomy here that has to be pointed out whenever you tell these stories, whenever you start talking about it. However, this officer decided to go into the Capitol building, which is a clear violation, and he was indicted federally. They go on to talk about his nationalistic impulses and so forth. I guess he wrote an opinion essay in the Houston Chronicle and so forth. So then it looks like that opinion essay was actually written by Acevedo. But regardless, there is concerns here when we have officers going on the other side and actually breaking the law, which is what took place with this officer, and it looks like he's no longer going to be in law enforcement and will be federally indicted. Similar to that story, 2 Virginia cops who were inside the Capitol also face federal charges. Now, their situation is a little bit different in that they claim that they did not participate in or have anything to do with the violence. However, there is a photo of them being inside the Capitol building in front of a statue, and they both put this online as well. So, according to the Roanoke Times, a federal arrest warrant unsealed Wednesday leveled charges against Officer Jacob Fracker and his supervisor, Sergeant Thomas T.J. Robertson. The warrant charges them with knowingly entering a restricted building without authority to do so, knowingly engaging in conduct that disrupts government business, and engaging in disruptive conduct in the Capitol in order to interfere with a session of Congress. So they claim that they did nothing illegal, nor did they witness any violence, and that I do not know. We only know what their statements are and the fact that there is a now viral photo of them posing in front of a statue of John Stark, a Revolutionary War officer known for coining the New Hampshire state motto, "Live free or die." So they're going to have their day in court. And of course, as always, with all things, we're not going to jump to any conclusions until they have had their day in court and until they have had their chance. But both of these arrests or indictments have taken place. And there's a lot of things that you're hearing. And one of the things I wanted to touch on is this idea. You know, there were those that said, well, we weren't actually the agitators. We were there to listen to the president. And then people started running into the building and we followed. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's not a defense. In fact, I'm fairly certain what my mother would have told me years ago when I was knee-high to a grasshopper is that if everyone was jumping off a bridge, Wayne, would you also jump off a bridge? I'm pretty sure that's what she said. And I think smart me that probably needed my mouth washed out with soap would have said something along the lines of, well, at least walk on the edge, Mom. But that's the thing, right? If everybody else is doing it, does that make it okay? So this whole excuse that you're hearing from some people that, well, we were just there for the rally, and then when other people went in, we decided, hey, let's go in. Let's see what they're doing. Yeah, we call that a bad idea. Guilty by association, you know, a few things going on there. So not a good excuse, not something we should be doing. And in general, if everybody else is doing it and it's a bad idea, don't do it. More in a minute. All right, so for this Positive Police News segment, let me tell you, I got 2 stories for you. I want to tell you just a little bit about pretty exciting and dramatic video. This out of Ohio. It is dated January 11th. I'm going to put a link in the show notes. You have got to see this video. It's quite crazy. So this female, 60-year-old Mary Thresh, and she's the owner of Nothing Bunt Cakes in Mason. She was heading to meet friends when she suffered a diabetic emergency behind a church. And you'll see in the video that she ends up out in the middle of this field where there's leaves and grass. And when she didn't show, they had reached out to Montgomery police officer Rich Riley and told him that she could be having a medical emergency. So thank God, somehow he ends up seeing the vehicle. They were going to start a ping on the phone to try to locate her as a missing endangered. However, had they waited for that, she may not have survived this incident. Instead, miraculously, the officer drives around the corner, sees the vehicle out in the field. While she is indeed having a medical emergency, she is unconscious with the car running and her foot was stuck on the accelerator. That, of course, was causing the tires of the vehicle to keep spinning wildly while she was having this medical emergency. And then she ends up igniting the brush underneath the vehicle. When the officers show up, a deputy and an off-duty police sergeant are the first to arrive. And at first they try to break the window and to no avail. They can't seem to get into the vehicle. And you can see in the video that there are active flames up underneath the car. So you hear him on video along with some choice words. So I will warn you if you have little ones when you're watching the video. They end up shooting out the rear window of the car. And immediately, of course, as oxygen and flames go together, they nearly engulfs them and they're able to get her out. And as they say, quote, she was seconds away from being burned alive, end quote. She suffered severe burns to her left arm and leg. However, she is out of the hospital and she is recovering. And these officers are heroes. They did what officers across this nation do each and every day. Riley is being treated for several injuries, including a second-degree burn to his hand when he reached into the car to pull her out. The injury, unfortunately, is to his shooting hand, so he's going to be off active duty for a little while he recovers and is able, of course, to retest and requalify to come back to active service. But great job to those officers. And, you know, those are the type stories that we like bringing you on a regular basis because that is what law enforcement does. And it's awesome. To that end, the second story that I want to tell you about this week is in reference to the Capitol riots yet again. The headline is, Lone Capitol Police Officer Faces Down Mob to Save Lives. And again, check out the link, please. It's in our show notes. You go to our website and check out the show page, which would have this link. But Officer Eugene Goodman is being hailed a hero after he lured away an angry crowd from the open Senate chambers. So you've probably seen this video. It's gone viral as well if you are still on Twitter. We won't even go down the Twitter road right now, but we are still on Twitter for today. But if you have seen it on Twitter, it's pretty amazing. You can see the lone police officer. He's being chased by an angry mob through the halls of the Capitol, and he ends up standing his ground. In fact, he ends up pushing the leader of the mob back. And what they don't know, or what they should know now, is that this officer actually probably saved their lives as well, they being the angry mob, because there was open Senate chambers on the other side of where he was, and had they pushed past him, they probably would have been met with deadly force. So not only did he save the lives potentially of people in the Senate in the Congress and the Senate chambers, but also he saved the lives of the rioters. So a lot of calls right now. Goodman is an Army veteran who spent time in Iraq, and several have called for Goodman to receive national commendations for his part in saving the lives of people during this Capitol riot. And I think it's a pretty impressive video, and I love this photo because you have him standing in the hallway and you see this angry mob coming at him, and he's standing there and you see his hand on his service weapon still holstered, and his other arm is up, and he just stands there saying, hey, listen, you're not going to get past me. And that is, to me, symbolic of this blue line. I know, the blue line has been very controversial in the last year, sadly, because it's misunderstood. And yet this image alone shows us exactly that. It shows us the blue line in action. He stands there between anarchy and civility and says, you will not pass. And thank God they didn't, and thank God that he was willing to stand. More in a minute. So welcome back. In this final section, I want to talk to you about something to think about for this week and until our next chance to get together and talk in a future podcast. You know, if you're asking me personally, are you asking me personally? I think we have a lot of chaos and dark days ahead. I know the idea is to come on here and give you a little rah-rah-ree pep talk and that things are going great. Yeah, I don't foresee anything bad happening. And yet, when we take a look at the amount of spending that's going on and the cancel culture that's taking place, and I mean, we have duly elected presidents being removed by big tech. We have companies being removed by big tech. We have a lot of scary things going on, quite frankly, that are probably not going to get any better. But here is the good news, right? Through all this, law enforcement is going to remain the line between the anarchy and the civility. They're going to be the ones that stand on this front line. So what I want you to think about, whether you're in law enforcement or you're not in law enforcement, is I want you to think about what you need to do for your safety and for your family's safety and for, in a word, to be more resilient. That's something you're going to hear me talking about more and more. In fact, in about a week, I'm going to be participating yet again in a local academy's training on resiliency. It's something that I think is so important, and yet it's so lost in this current culture. It's the ability to stand through something. So we're going to be talking more about that in a future one, but I just, for this week, want you to start thinking about it. What can you do to be in a better position for your family and for those around you and for what may come, right? So I want to read you a poem. It's a poem that I have put out online. I don't think I've done it on the podcast, but if I have, it's been probably about a year, so why not do it again, right? I think it is a poem that speaks a lot to what we're seeing right now. There are those that will disagree. There's different interpretations, as with everything. And as with everything, you're welcome to have your own interpretation that may be different than mine. May be correct, may not be correct. We call that an opinion. So the poem is called The Gods of the Copybook Headings, and it was written by Rudyard Kipling, and it was published in 1919. Copybook headings were short phrases, and some have said that they were written by teachers at the top of a piece of paper, and the students would copy them over and over again to improve their handwriting. You probably recall, those of you who had cursive in school, which I'm probably a small percentage of in this audience, that you would have these books. Now, this was different than what a copybook heading was, but it was the same idea that we would write the same sentence over and over again to practice your cursive writing and to improve on your writing. And the phrases that we're referring to when we talk about copybook headings were phrases that have moral tradition and wisdom that spoke to life. The idea would be that it would convey to students lessons that might inspire them to work harder or be better while also simultaneously improving their handwriting. So this poem means different things to different people. What I like about it, one of the things I like about it, is it speaks of life as being cyclical, as it is. It's a cycle. It speaks to man's desire for progress, but yet in the end of the poem, and yet I think in the end of life, there is always this return to the reality of the moral framework from which we were created. You know, he speaks directly to the gods, little G-O-D-S, of the marketplace and the progressive ideals that cause man to build greater and greater things. And yet in the end, it's the simplicity of the truths in the copybook headings that are what man returns to because they're true. They're those moral precepts that are going to happen. Now, some find this poem to be about the negatives of capitalism, though that's not how I see it. That is what some people will say, and that's okay. You can draw your own conclusion. I see it rather as a warning against greed and against progressivism and the rise of totalitarian regimes. I would love, though, to hear your thoughts, and feel free to comment on our social media pages. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and there's a few different ways you can do that, which I will give you at the end of this podcast. But let me read this poem to you, because I think now more than ever, there's a few things in here that really stand out to me and that really say a lot about where we are in a society. So, The Gods of the Copybook Headings by Rudyard Kipling. As I pass through my incarnations in every age and race, I make my proper prostrations to the gods of the marketplace. Peering through reverent fingers, I watch them flourish and fall, and the gods of the copybook headings, I notice outlast them all. We were living in trees when they met us. They showed us each in turn that water would certainly wet us, as fire would certainly burn. But we found them lacking in uplift, vision, and breadth of mind. So we left them to teach the gorillas while we followed the march of mankind. We moved as the Spirit listed. They never altered their pace, being neither cloud nor windborne like the gods of the marketplace. But they always caught up with our progress, and presently word would come that a tribe had been wiped off its ice field, or the lights had gone out in Rome. With the hopes that our world is built on, they were utterly out of touch. They denied that the moon was Stilton. They denied she was even Dutch. They denied that wishes were horses. They denied that a pig had wings. So we worship the gods of the market, who promised these beautiful things. When the Cambrian measures were forming, they promised perpetual peace. They swore if we gave them our weapons, that the wars of the tribes would cease. But when we disarmed, they sold us and delivered us bound to our foe. And the gods of the copybook headings said, stick to the devil, you know. On the first feminine sandstones, we were promised the fuller life, which started by loving our neighbor and ended by loving his wife, till our women had no more children and the men lost reason and faith. And the gods of the copybook headings said, the wages of sin is death. In this carnivorous epoch we were promised abundance for all, by robbing selected Peter to pay for collective Paul. But though we had plenty of money, there was nothing our money could buy. And the gods of the copybook headings said, if you don't work, you die. Then the gods of the market tumbled, and their smooth-tongued wizards withdrew. And the hearts of the meanest were humbled, and began to believe it was true, that all is not gold that glitters, and two make four. And the gods of the copybook headings limped up to explain it once more. As it will be in the future, it was at the birth of man. There are only 4 things certain since social progress began: that a dog returns to his vomit, and the sow returns to her mire, and the burnt fool's bandaged finger goes wobbling back to the fire. And that after this is accomplished, and the brave new world begins, when all men are paid for existing, and no men must pay for his sins. As surely as water will wet us, as surely as fire will burn, the gods of the copybook headings, with terror and slaughter, return. So let me leave you this week with this final thought. You know, I think we are headed into some dark days. I think the chaos and division will probably get worse. In some ways, you may see it swept under the rug. In other ways, you may see it come to the forefront. I think you're going to see more silencing, and I think it's going to be concerning what we see. But through it all, there's going to be good things too. Because at the end of the day, fear and faith cannot coexist. If you're afraid, if you deal every day in fear, you can't coexist with having faith in tomorrow, faith in something bigger than ourselves. And that's what I want to encourage you on. Let's make tomorrow better. Why? How? By our actions. Doing what we can do, controlling what we can control, standing in the gap, if you would, and doing the things that we know are right, and concentrating on what we can control, the things we can control with our family, the things we can control with our neighbors and in our community. Start there, and together, we're going to have a great year. Welcome to 2021.